I'm looking forward to this session. I think after we had Michelle Kang giving us an extremely inspirational description of what she's doing earlier this morning, there's lots more to say. I'm just going to ask our panel to just give a brief introduction for the audience. So would you like to start, Jessica?
Hello, everyone. Very nice to be here with you all. My name is Jessica Berman. I'm the commissioner of the National Women's Soccer League. I took my role approximately 2 years ago in April of 2022. I spent about 2 decades of my career working in men's professional sports in the United States on behalf of the National Hockey League, the NBA, Major League Baseball. Very nice to be here with you all.
Hi, my name's Hannah Brown. I head up women's football at DAZN. My background is in finance originally and media, and then kind of put the two together around sports ventures, and over the last few years developed a keen interest in the development of what I think is a big venture opportunity around women's football.
Hello, my name is Victoire Cogevina. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Mercury 13. Started my career in football about 15 years ago now. I started as an agent in the MLS. I then moved on to becoming a tech entrepreneur, building Gloria, which was a consumer product for football fans that was sold to its biggest competitor at the end of 22. I joined OneFootball as VP of Women's Football, their first one in 15 years of company. I also joined their board. And then after a few months, I decided to leave to start Mercury 13, which is essentially a multi-club ownership group. Today with no clubs, but on Monday we'll have our first club where we'll be announcing it, so it's very exciting times. Thank you for having me.
So I think it's fair to say, at least on this side of the Atlantic, women's football has seen an explosion in the last 5 years in particular. Average revenues just in the top 15 clubs in Europe in the last season were up 61% on previous years. Audience has grown immensely. I think probably on the same thing in the US side, but we'll come back to that. And I think in some ways, with all its huge potential, women's game is at a crossroads. It could continue with the exponential growth, or if the wrong decisions were made, it could just falter and fizzle and have a lot longer of a trajectory. So I think that's what we want to discuss. Funding of European teams in particular, and investment in European teams is very, very uneven. In a sense, we're starting from a standing start in Europe. And I'd like Victoire for you to start and just say, what is the unmet need as far as just having an ecosystem of teams that play good football and a kind of a pipeline leading up to it? Where do you start with your investment if you're looking at that?
I'll give a bit of context before answering that question around why Mercury is really focused in Europe. The model of the leagues here works very differently from the US, and when building a multi-club ownership, that is really important to be able to scale up the shared services, which is really what we do. In terms of the European market, I think there's one word everyone should walk away here understanding that is really important for its growth, is independence. A lot of these clubs, whether they're independent themselves or they're within a bigger club and have a women's team, have been run in a way in the shadows of the men's team for many years. And today there's this incredible moment in time where women's football is growing exponentially, as you just mentioned, but it needs a certain skill set and a certain investment of resources that the men's game is not able to provide today. And so Mercury 13 is one of hopefully many other options that clubs can have to basically have a dedicated resource funding as well as a skill set needed. And I think a good example to finish illustrating this idea is, when we look at the men's game, we'll think about an IPO, a very mature business that has been around in some cases for over 100 years. And it's been run in a very specific ways. The revenue streams are kind of already set in stone. When you look at the women's game, it's very much a startup. There's no product market fit. A lot of people are trying to understand how to bring women's football to a new audience, which is families and women in particular. And that requires a different skill set, the same as a startup founder and an executive that runs a publicly traded company. And so creating that independence by providing those types of resources early on in their journeys will be fundamental for their success. And ultimately also building a more sustainable business model. We're actually discussing this backstage, and Jessica and myself have different views on how this needs to happen. But having been in men's football, particularly over the last decade, you know, the business model of it in some cases is not sustainable. And here we get a second mover advantage into a sport that already exists, but with essentially a new view on how to do things. And so at Mercury, we really believe in investing. That is a part of the game, no matter what. And then going straight into the commercial opportunity and really making sure these teams can become commercial assets that generate revenues that can then be, you know, invested into the football side. The last thing I'm going to say is that it is okay for it to be different from the men's. It doesn't make it worse or better. It's just different. But the motivations are always going to look different. The men's UEFA Champions League pool, prize pool, is over 2 billion euros. On the women's side, the same tournament with the same amount of teams, the same structure, is 24 million. So obviously, teams are not as motivated to go after, you know, success on the pitch. But on the commercial side, there's this amazing opportunity, which I'll be happy to talk later about.
Well, Jessica, let's turn to you then. As you said, you and Victoire had a little bit of a sort of slightly different ideas, but I think with the same end goal. Perhaps you could talk about how things are a bit different in the US compared to here, or on this side of the Atlantic, and maybe address what Victoire was mentioning there.
Sure. Obviously, there's an incredible running start that Europe has, building and drafting off of the success of the men's team, which has allowed for the women's game, I think, to catch up in many ways. We actually describe our superpower in the National Women's Soccer League as, in part, our independence. You have people who wake up every single day thinking morning, noon, and night about how to make the NWSL a commercial success and how to make it an investable proposition. And everyone in this room who is a business person, and we are at the Financial Times Summit, when you build a business and the people who are running that business think about it second or for other reasons, you're not going to get the best possible results. And so the fact that our league is independent and financially independent, which I should mention only happened as of 2 years ago, even though the league is in its 12th season, which is starting on March 15th, it's actually only been since 2022 that the league has been completely independent from US soccer. And if you look at the growth trajectory of our league and this very critical inflection point, when did our commercial success really begin to materialize? It really followed the moment when the NWSL broke away, which predated me. I'm approaching my 2-year anniversary here, and the only world I know is a world where our board, our investors, our employees think every single day about only the NWSL and what are the right and most strategic decisions for us to make in terms of how we spend our time and what innovations we explore for growth on behalf of growing the professional women's game. And that is a wholesale difference. And the success we've seen as a result is really in every single metric that you can imagine. So I think some of the most notable ones are, most recently, we went to market with our media rights that expired in 2023, and we announced in November our new 4-year media deal with 4 partners in Amazon, CBS, ESPN, and Scripps for $250 million over 4 years. And when we say that to people, their jaw hits the ground. And actually, if you ask people on our board and internally at the league office and those who worked closely with us on negotiating that deal, we still think it's not enough. If you look at the value of the product that we're providing, and in particular, the incredible athleticism of the athletes that we offer and the opportunities that exist from a commercial perspective and a viewership perspective, we know and have seen over history that when women's soccer is in places and spaces where people watch sports, that people actually watch and consume. And that has never been the opportunity that we've offered the sport. So for the first time, we'll actually have more than 100 games in basically free to air in the US. And we actually believe that although we've had incredible success over the last 2 years in attendance and viewership and in sponsorship, that this next 4 years is going to be that turning point.
That's really interesting. Hannah, I'd like to bring you in here because we're talking about viewing, and DAZN has also removed its paywall for women's football. So is this a loss leader? Can you explain the thinking behind that? And if you have anything to add about the more general picture, please do.
So I think, just taking a little step back, it's about what any investor or interested body has in the space, which there are a number, and I think women's football has got a huge range of assets at its disposal when it thinks about its growth opportunity. And that comes from kind of two kind of perspectives. One is the opportunity around business growth. You've got really interesting players that are actively interested in the space. You've got this kind of, for those of you that, I don't know, for those of you in the room that are close to the US grassroots landscape and the youth landscape, but the US had this running start at women's football. There's a piece of legislation back in the 70s called Title IX that ensured that it was a part of the civil rights movement, but it meant that girls had as equal opportunity to get athletic scholarships to university. Going to university in the States is seriously expensive. It then drove a big commercial program around pay-to-play soccer at the youth level, which then meant that the best athletes were choosing soccer and other sports like volleyball and sticking with that through to college in the hope they had a better spot at university. So there was this big commercial reason why women's football developed at the speed that it did in the United States, and it's been doing so since the 70s. And when you come across to Europe, you've got a different set of dynamics that are driving growth, and that is the big European powerhouses coming to play in a really meaningful way. And we've got David here on the front seat, with his Arsenal hat on from his history, but through to what Chelsea have done around the game, Manchester United coming to the game recently. We've seen what's going on in France and in Germany. And then I kind of describe to people not use this space of the Barcelona effect. That the Barcelona have kind of almost been the Tiger Woods moment in women's football. Someone's come and reset the performance standards of women's football on the pitch. They're playing, dynamic and exciting football, incredibly athletic. And they've taken the game to the Americans. And, and we've seen the Americans for, the first time in a while being toppled at the top level. Americans won't like that, and they'll up their game. Emma Hayes off to the US. So you're seeing this very dynamic international space, which is very interesting for the game. And competition, I believe, drives innovation and acceleration of progress. So there's that really interesting dynamic. And then you have, on the kind of broadcast and the media side, platforms which are under pressure and who want to lend their support to the game. They recognise there's been huge investment in the men's game and in other premium men's sport. The women's game, particularly here in Europe, was pretty held back with lengthy bans at the FA level. And so you're now seeing this kind of what we hope is the beginning of the S-curve in terms of acceleration of progress and value, but yet there still remains huge commercial barriers and issues. And a lot of that is around audience avidity, the quality of that fandom, which is in part also linked to quality on the pitch. So we see very great tentpole events. We've seen big kind of global championships and regional championships doing really well. Top matchups between top clubs when well broadcasted and put in good slots, performing well. But there is a very, very sharp drop-off below that top tier, and that is the big focus on how you can get collective investment across all the various stakeholders and how they bring the very best of their assets to kind of collectively drive progress, de-risk everyone's investment and accelerate our kind of path to a commercial future for the game. But we are at a very balanced and challenging moment in time on that basis because this not direct risk for not direct returns for a lot of the commercial investors who can really accurately forecast and plot their route to what their business looks like in the future. And we do that as a broadcast, and we can maybe come on to that in more detail, how we think about audience. But the nice thing, I think, for the women's game is there's lots of important and powerful stakeholders who don't actually need this to make profit. What they do need to do is make sure that across a range of factors, their investment is worthwhile for at least the next 5 to 10 years.
So if they're not motivated primarily by profit, what does success look like for them then?
I think it depends on the platform and depends on their approach to their business. So I think if you're a big domestic broadcaster, so Jessica will comment better on her broadcast partners than probably I will, but they are big domestic operators. I'm sure they're under pressure from their sponsorship and their advertising investors to make sure that they're representing female sport in a more equitable way. I think potentially some of the big ownership groups on the men's side recognise that there is an imperative there. And to Jessica's point, if they put good content in good slots, they expect if they market it well that will perform well. And I think the balance of those investment deals isn't just in media rights, but it's also in quality of the production, it's in quality of the marketing, because if you just put the money in one pot, you don't drive the quality of improvement of the product and the awareness of it for that to drive growth and sustainable kind of re-engagement and how people proliferate and talk to their pals that they saw something great and they should come in and get involved. From our perspective, DAZN, we're a global digital platform, so how can we use digital broadcast, especially here in Europe, where much stricter regulations around broadcast and advertising partnerships? How do you use a data-led, a first-party relationship with fans, free therefore being a really critical pathway to scale? How do you use that environment to create an investable asset for the future and grow a big data set around the game and hopefully develop really cool and innovating ways to engage fans? And I think other domestic broadcasters also bring their own clout and their own marketing networks. And I do think that there's space for everybody to play. And more so, I think there's a need for everyone to play. I don't think this is yet like someone comes along and does it by themselves. They're not simply powerful enough to achieve what they need to in what is a highly competitive modern content and and entertainment and consumer landscape. You're not competing against men's football. You're competing against a huge proliferation of content and pulls on people's time right across the entertainment ecosystem.
Jessica, you were nodding there. I think you have something to add to that.
I think it's really the difference between, and I think culturally, our sport has been reframed as an investable business proposition, and it is not charity. And that is a very hard line distinction that you have to draw and really hold yourself accountable to as we think about what was the way that we were able to get these big domestic media companies to see us as an investable business proposition. It's because we were investing in ourselves as a business. And so you talk about broadcast production, those decisions that are made require really courageous and bold decisions, and really it's our ownership group who really made the decision that we were going to be the first women's sports league in the world to invest in VAR. We're going to be the first women's sports league to do our production at a 12-camera production. And so when you demonstrate that bravery and that confidence in the business from an investment perspective, it allows for sponsors and media properties to see you as a business as well, and it gives them the confidence to know that they're going to recoup their investment through sponsorship. And they're not doing it for charity. I can assure you that CBS, ESPN, Amazon Scripps did not do this because they want to be nice or because they want to support the women. They're doing it because they believe they're going to reach a new unaddressable audience through men's sports, and live content is at a premium, and they see the opportunity actually 4 times over. We actually brought 4 partners to the table to be able to do that.
Again, I actually want to add something to what Jessica said. The word audience, right? I think it is so important here, because it's this opportunity that in rooms like this for years and years and years, it was never spoken about, right? What does the female consumer of football look like? And how powerful can she become, not only for leagues and broadcasters, for sponsors, and on the commercial side. And that's a very big part of our thesis. I've been a football fan my whole life. I'm Argentinian. I am a Racing fan. I grew up going to the stadium. And I've never been spoken to by Racing as a club. They always spoke to my brother or my father. I am now married to a Fulham fan, and I've become a Fulham fan as a by obligation. And again, Fulham also rarely speaks to me as a consumer. However, I'm spending so much more money than my husband on Fulham at the moment. And that there's value there, essentially. You all laugh because you know this is true. Women are controlling 70% of the household purse. They make decisions for their husbands, they make decisions for their kids and for themselves. And so we always look at it from a different perspective as club owners. And what does the world look like if football is consumed by the other half? What does it look like? And I believe that socially and culturally, we're not there anymore, or we're not there yet, I guess, because consuming football only looks one way. You go to a stadium for 90 minutes, you buy your jersey once in a while, you watch your highlights, and you call your friends to talk about those highlights. Women don't need an excuse to talk to their female friends, so they don't need to watch any highlight or watch any goal to call their friends. They go for other reasons to the stadium, and they want to buy merch that actually looks good on them. I mean, I've yet have to find a woman that looks good in a football jersey. It's not like a fact of life. And so I believe that when you, as a club, and I speak to the clubs in this room, there's this incredible opportunity, once in a lifetime generation opportunity type of thing, where you think, okay, well, I have this product, and on a more civil, cultural movement, it's become a gender equality movement, right? And that there's no denying that. How do I take part of that history writing and make a product that actually make women excited to come, and not the women like myself that have loved football for way too many years, but women that actually never cared about football whatsoever. And now, they're looking at it and like, actually, can I dress up and go to a stadium and have, rosé on an oatmeal latte or whatever things that women care about, which I believe other sports like Wimbledon, for example, and tennis have done so very well. And the NFL, and we cannot go in an entire sports summit and not speak about Taylor Swift and the NFL, because that's a phenomenon that shows you that even in America, where women are a very big part of sports from a cultural perspective, at a business level, a commercial level, is the first time in the history of the Super Bowl that there's so many female-oriented brands that actually buy spots. They did it because Taylor Swift's audience was there. But for the last 30, 40 years, 50% of the audience of the Super Bowl were women already. So why did it take Taylor Swift to wake everyone up? So I think that, and I'll wrap up with this, we are in a moment where a lot of businesses are realizing that women have a lot more power than what they thought. And they're positioning their brands, and clubs are brands at the end of the day, in a way that tells women that they care about them, that they're worthy, that they need to be respected and celebrated for the hardships that they've had, and that it is a new chapter now. And so there's no better vehicle, there's no better platform to deliver that message than through a football club. And so we're big believers in that, and I think that we can speak quite a lot about the existing audience, but the most exciting part about women's football is the audience that's to come, not the one that we are seeing right now. I don't know if you agree with me, but...
I think that's very interesting. And I do think also, with what all of you are saying, one of the questions, at least here, you talked briefly, Hannah, about Title IX and about this kind of big movement of soccer in the US that we have missed out on. And once you go away from the very top tier, even in the WSL, the top of the WSL and the bottom of the WSL, resourcing is very different. And as soon as you go below that, at the moment, it falls off a cliff. There's very little there. The people are playing in conditions that, really even use almost grassroots conditions. So how do you up the kind of offer that you want for your viewers or to have a commercial success from? How do you do that in the current climate of where we are? Because it takes, it's not just having investment, commercial opportunities around a team in a big stadium. It's investing in facilities, in medical care, in very, very basic things. So how does that happen at the moment? I'd love to hear your
I'm probably not the best person to comment on this, other than the fact that we, as broadcasters, and I think I can represent broadcasters more than the one I work for, is there is still a huge quality problem in terms of the product. And you do not need to go to the bottom end of the league table to find that quality problem. So, we have come to expect, and we know what great top-class women's football looks like. And using my Tiger Woods analogy, we know what those top European Championship, those top club matchups look like in the very best moments when they are in the clear, they've got their strongest squads there. And we only hope that is going to, a bit like what we've seen in golf, is just like a huge proliferation of players that are stronger and more athletic and more talented in 10 years' time than they are now. So, but we know what good can look like, and even day in, day out, we are a broadcaster of the Champions League, and I worry that I offend people when I say this, because no one wants that quality and that success to come through more than I do, I don't think. But, we've just come through 6 match rounds of the Champions League. We go into the quarterfinals in March. we were missing a number of the top clubs, even to the group stage, because of how, you know, the kind of size and structure of the league is currently structured. It will evolve a bit. But we got to match day 5 and 6, and a lot of the groups were done. There were understandably league kickoffs, you know, fixtures, on the weekends before and after. We had midweek evening games. And because of injury and player rotation, you know, we saw matchups between 2 leading clubs in Europe on both the men's and the women's side. And it was a mediocre game and a mediocre match experience in the premier European competition played in a leading men's club stadium in West London. Like, you know, there were very understandable reasons for why that wasn't great, but I'm a big sports fan, and, you know, to be honest with you, it wasn't that fun. Like, it just wasn't a great experience. And so how do we think about the structures and the investment that when we put money into rights, into production, into marketing, that the clubs and the leagues are also, all we can do is say, look, if we're going to put money into the league, into clubs, into our partnerships, into what we do, these are the level of expectations we have, and then how the, you know, Jessica probably can comment better on this, on how the leagues hold the clubs to account and make sure that these standards are being upheld consistently across the league, but also the clubs are giving the support and the environment they need to make sure that quality on the pitch is good enough. Because we can talk about the audience of the future, but I tell you, they've got a load of other stuff to engage in that is absolutely top class, and then they will not come and they will not stay and be engaged in a mediocre game of football because they know what good looks like, and we can't expect them to watch and engage in that. And I think that is a very, very critical part to future commercial success.
Is this the same in the US, or is this slightly different in Europe?
I think, again, this is a place, and I think we always come back to structure and governance, because that's actually what creates the foundation for growth. And this is one of the superpowers of the National Women's Soccer League, because we do have consistency and we do have minimum standards across our league, where every single team is playing every single regular season game in a stadium that has 10,000 capacity. They all have training facilities, some are shared. We're evolving in that space, and more than half of our teams are either in the process of building or planning to build dedicated training facilities for these athletes. And going back to what the subject of the panel is, like, how do we optimize the commercial success of women's football? There's the question about infrastructure, which is expensive, but critically important to setting the foundation for growth, not just on the training side, but for game day experience. Right now, actually in 2.5 weeks, we're opening in our league in Kansas City the first ever purpose-built stadium for women's football. That has never happened, and it's 2024. And Chris and Angie Long, who own the Kansas City Current, have made a private investment and privately financed $200 million investment to build a stadium so that they can actually control their own revenue streams. That's how they're commercializing their investment. They're going to be able to control concessions and parking and merchandise and all of the fan and game day experience, so that they actually can run their business the way any investor would want to run their business. We need more of that. It's going to take a really long time for that to happen, not only because of the cost, but because of how it intersects with cities and the public sector. The second thing, and you talked about this a little bit with the Champions League, about what needs to happen for women's football, women's soccer, to commercialize and optimize its commercial success. And we go back to the fundamentals of, and I know there are a lot of people in this room from FIFA and UEFA and the clubs and the leagues. The women's international match calendar is so critically important to the future success of women's football. And we don't need to do it the same way the men have done it. And we know that if we continue to jam together the opportunities for national teams and club teams to play, that the players are going to suffer, the product is going to suffer, and the business is going to suffer. And it is true that in professional leagues and professional clubs, our ownership group is responsible for the daily training environment of these players. They pay for it, and they hopefully generate revenue. That's how we make this an investable business proposition. But if the players keep getting called out when they're being paid by us, it's really hard to attract investment. And the amount of investment that needs to happen in the next 5 to 10 years is incredible. It's an incredible amount of investment. And if we do all those things that you said at the beginning of the panel, this will become a thriving business. And that is why I came to this league. That's what our mission is to be the best league in the world, but there are a lot of things that are outside of our control that will have a direct impact on whether that becomes true.
I think just on Jessica's point there, it's about speed of how quickly you get to that future, because you could keep evolving slowly and in 25 years be getting close, but for the new owners of the Bay Area franchise that put in north of $50 million, 25 years will be simply not the investment horizon that they have when they put that money into that club. So how does the whole ecosystem pull together to kind of realize that future faster, I think is the fundamental point.
Well, maybe it's multi-club ownership, as Victoire would say, and potentially Michelle Kang, who's, I believe, still here.
We need many more Victoires and Michelle Kangs to fund this. But I think, look, we continue speaking about all the things that need to happen. And I think it's frustrating as well, because especially when you're in it and you're, every day fighting for it and trying to make it happen, it's now has become very evident that the standards to which we're held and to which women's football are held up are totally unrealistic, which one way or another is very real for women as well. We're always held to this stupid expectations of society. And so, men's football has had 100 years head start to us. And now, they're expecting the quality of the game to be great and have amazing athletes, that the broadcasting rights are super expensive, that, they fill every stadium every match day. And that's not realistic to where we are. It is moving at an insane pace. Nobody can deny that. I started Mercury 13 2 weeks before giving birth. And the reason why, and I told this to my husband, was women's football waits for no one. If I wait 6 more months, it's just not going to be the deal that it is today. And so, at the very least, I think a lot of the people in this room agree it's the right time to invest, because investors want to come early, not late. I have a few of my investors in this room, and they've been massive supporters of what we're doing from day one. And, they want to see women's football succeed. They want to see women be a part of the sport. But they also understand there's a fantastic new opportunity to rewrite the rules in many ways. But trying to understand that, all these 7 different things that we need to get right to get to the next point it's going to come with time. But if we include women from day one, which I think is the biggest lesson for women's football, it's just how can we make women part of this experience and actually use the momentum of this gender equality movement for the positive? Because I think you can ask most of the women and even men that go to women's football matches today, the first thing they'll say, I want to support the women. I have a daughter, I have a sister, I have a wife. I want to be here to support the women, because it is essentially evidence that you support women if you're basically in the stadium and paying tickets to do that. It is evolving, and it's going to become a very lucrative business. And at least our vision at Mercury 13, and if we know that we did things right, is because Men's Club gave us a call and said, how did you do it?
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions on the iPad coming from our virtual viewers, and one of them was, which is actually a fitting last kind of question before we go to the floor. What is the end goal for women's football? That's a huge question. So I guess I would slightly rephrase that to say, what does success in the next 5 years look like as opposed to further out? Does anyone have a thought on that? Jessica?
Sure. We've just gone through a strategic planning process across the league and very clearly defined our goals, which are to be the best league in the world, not the best women's league, but the best league in the world. And we believe we have an incredible opportunity to do that. Some of the ways we think about measuring them are similar to the way the world measures sports and their success. So we look at viewership, we look at attendance, we look at sponsorship revenue, we look at licensing and merchandise sales, and we actually think there's incredible upside and opportunity in places that haven't yet been tapped into. We also know that in the US, the next 4 to 6 years are going to be an explosive growth with or without the intentional investment that we're making. And so we intend to use those inflection points very strategically, with the World Cup coming in 2026, with the possibility that the Women's World Cup will come in 2027. There's an incredible amount of interest in the US, and the age-old question of when is America going to start to pay attention to the global sport, has happened. They are now paying attention. They love this sport, and we feel like we have the halo effect of the U.S. women's national team and their incredible success, and we talked about this earlier. It's one of the few sports that if you asked 100 people in the U.S., men and women, to close their eyes and imagine greatness and soccer and America, they think of women. There are very few sports where that is true, and that really serves as the catalyst for all of the growth that we're seeing.
So we're getting quite low on time. I just want to hear from someone from maybe a European perspective on how that would look. So maybe, Hannah, maybe you could answer what do you think success would be, quite briefly, because then I can...
We look from our perspectives, we want to build a scale global audience around women's football and a first-party relationship with them, serving them, engaging them, delighting them, surprising them in ways that we believe we can as a digital-first broadcaster. In that, I think our relationship with the leagues, the approach that we take to rights and rights structures, about how we properly tie in commercial and marketing obligations alongside media obligations and production to make sure that we work really closely together with leagues around growth. That will be a fundamental part of any future relationship we have with rights holders, and we believe with that sort of approach how we can support successful stakeholders. So that's our vision, and definitely part of our plan that we sell to our board.
Right.
For us, it's independence. It's what I said at the beginning of this panel. In Europe, men's football has been, and as an Argentinian, it's hard to say this, but it's always been a massive success. Everyone looks up to Europe, and that halo effect will come to women very, very soon, and that's going to create a lot of competition, which is going to be great for the product, and all these things will happen inevitably. I don't think there's a discussion or argument around that, but really understanding that independence of resources, and I'm not only speaking about money, I'm also speaking about talent. The people that are running these clubs, you need to have prepared people, not the people that didn't make it in men's football land in women's football. And all those things are what we're working on to try and prove it out. And again, I think if there's success on the numbers, if we're financially sustainable businesses that have amazing profit, not revenue, amazing profit, that's going to get more and more people involved and snowballed. And I think there's a great opportunity to do it in Europe. Learning from our American colleagues, for sure, but doing it in a space where football has been important and a central part of people's lives for a century.
So we have a little bit of time left for questions. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask?
We've convinced everyone.
Yeah, everyone's just...
Questions?
No questions? Oh, here's one. Yes, please.
Hi. My question's about ticket prices, and I'm really interested to get the outside UK perspective on this, because for the Women's Super League at the moment, the ticket prices are very competitive and very low, and it's to get people in the ground and grow the game and give people those experiences. And obviously full stadiums look good on the TV, which is great. But I'm wondering how sustainable that is, really. It's currently costs about 10% of the price to take one of my children to a women's game as it does to a men, which is brilliant. But is that sustainable? Can we keep ticket prices low and grow in other ways, like all the commercial ways you've talked about? Or is there a danger that by setting these low prices, you're putting a low value on actually going to these games?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I understand the temptation to give tickets away, not just because it looks good on TV, but because people believe so firmly that if you could only experience it, you're going to want to pay for it. Our view is actually when you give things away for free or highly discount them, people don't value it. When you think about things that you register for that don't have a cost, like a panel discussion or a dinner or something you RSVP to, if you don't pay in advance, even if it's some amount of money that actually is a transaction, it creates a level of accountability, and it actually frames your experience when you walk in the door to say, oh, I paid for this, so I'm going to look at this differently. I'm going to look at this as in the same way that I would look at any other experience I might pay for, whether it's a Broadway show or a men's sports event or any other thing that has value to you. You pay for vacations, you pay for entertainment, you should pay for watching women's football. And if we discount it, we will never get to a place where we build a sustainable business.
So
I disagree.
In the UK context?
Yeah. I disagree only because and I look at always trying to understand that whatever was true for men's football doesn't necessarily need to be true for women. So ticket and attendance has always been a big revenue stream for football clubs. But on the women's side, that's not necessarily true. Actually, it is a superpower, and especially here in Europe. I think in the US it's very different, that you can go and watch Arsenal or you can go and watch Chelsea for a tenth of the price. And not only can you go, but you can bring your entire family, and then it becomes an incredible experience for everyone. And so I think that keeping that and being a part of the spirit of women's football is going to be important. And then finding new ways of monetizing. I'm not saying that we should, be a non-profit and just open up the stadiums for free. Obviously, they cost money, but there's smarter way, I believe, that and building strategic partnerships with commercial partners, with pop-ups, with loads of other ways where you can still generate that revenue. They just don't come from the ticket. Yeah. And it's thinking differently about the consumer behavior. That's all.
Yeah, and I know we're out of time, but I think there's a balance here in recognizing what is a local market environment, what is affordability to somebody going to a game in Los Angeles versus someone going to a game in North London. Like, these are very different audience groups, very different learned behaviors. The cost of policing for men's games here is far in excess of the cost of policing for the women's games. So how you think about something that, in a world where you still don't have around the men's football clubs and the fandom switch across the women's team, the strong avidity, how you create at a price point that is attractive for people to take their whole family, something that they come and they go to the stadium. And this is not my stat, but someone from Arsenal Football Club, who I think they've been doing a phenomenal job the last couple of years, is saying that they had 60% of their, I think, and check this, but I think 60% of the attendees at the Emirates a few weeks ago had never been to the Emirates before, but all people that identify themselves as Arsenal fans. So that's got to be a growth opportunity. Getting the pricing right and not giving away things for free, I think, is important. But I think pricing is a really important factor, that you might live close to a stadium, you might actually be a West Ham fan and live in West London, and you will take your kids to a Chelsea game, but if it starts to become 120 quid to take your family, you're not going to go. If it's 50 quid, then you can probably make it happen. So I think it's a very careful balance that needs to be struck there.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. I think there's a lot more to discuss, actually, but thank you all. Thank you, Jessica and Hannah and Victoire. Thank you.